By the time I was in my 20s, I started having severe panic attacks. I would have heart palpitations, shortness of breath. I would feel like I was having a heart attack. In 2009, I decided to get breast implants, and shortly after I got the implants, I started having some symptoms. At first, it was inflammation, mostly in the chest. Then I started having dry mouth, extremely dry mouth. I would not be able to swallow. It felt like I was choking. Eating became very difficult for me. I did not produce enough saliva to swallow my food. So if I didn't always constantly have water with me, I would panic. I finally went to a doctor about this, and he ran some tests and found out that I did in fact have an autoimmune disease called Sjorgrens. Over time, the symptoms got worse. It was no longer just an isolated exposure here or there. It was every time I came into contact with a chemical. I would smell perfume on someone and I would have to leave. The same way with cleaning supplies. It was hard for me to go to the grocery store. You know, they just triggered a reaction. I could not feel myself talk. It would be like it was paralyzed, my whole mouth. And sometimes the numbness would creep up my face. Sometimes I would feel like my throat was closing and I would feel like I was going to pass out. So I had to start avoiding chemicals at all cost. I had to quit my job. I had to start working for my husband from home. Which was not what I wanted to do. It was not my passion, but it was the only way I could work and contribute without being exposed to chemicals. I had to give up a social life. Some of my friends felt like I was a freak, like I was avoiding them, and they were offended by it because I would tell them that they couldn't wear toiletries in front of me, and that was not okay with them. It was as if I was telling them that they smelled bad. So I really had to distance myself from people, which is not my nature at all. I'm a very social person, and I became very lonely and very depressed. And shortly after all of this happened, the food allergies began. I started noticing the same symptoms I would have with the chemicals would happen after I would eat, especially the mouth numbness. My glands in my neck would swell up. I would feel like I was going into anaphylactic shock. I would have inflammation in my body. I went to an allergist to be skin tested, and I tested positive for over 20 foods. I also had to carry an EpiPen in case I had an exposure. So I was in a constant state of fear that I would have an anaphylactic shock and that I would develop new allergies. So I became afraid to eat. I was so isolated that I had plenty of time to do research on my conditions, and since the traditional medical model was not helping me, since I was told there was no cure, I decided that I would take matters in my own hands and that there had to be an answer out there. So I started looking into alternative treatments. From a chiropractor, I did NATE, which is allergy treatment. I would have relief for maybe 2 days, and then the symptoms would be back. I went to the Environmental Health Center in Dallas and tried a treatment called ALF. So it was ingrained in me by this particular doctor that I had to live a life of avoidance, which was very depressing for me. Another treatment that I tried was chelation treatment. I had a mercury filling, so I thought, well, maybe if I had my filling removed, that might be the answer, and do a series of chelation treatments. Did absolutely nothing for me. I also had my breast implants removed because it was, I was told that I might be having mold illness due to my breast implants. So I had that done, spent thousands of dollars, put in an infrared sauna in my house to sweat out the toxins from the breast implants. Did various detoxes and cleanses that really didn't do anything for me. By 2014, I was almost on the verge of giving up. I felt like I had ruined my husband's life, so I had thoughts of leaving and living in a tent somewhere in isolation so he could move on with his life. I had thoughts of just asking the doctors to put me on a feeding tube. I just thought, well, maybe I'll just go off somewhere and just gradually starve to death, and then, you know, my loved ones would be better off. A friend that I had made from an online support group told me that she had gone to this seminar in Dallas with Annie Hopper, and how it had changed her life and how she was getting better. And I looked Annie up online, and it just seemed like the answer. I immediately started having hope. I was not going to be able to go to one of the in-person seminars, but I figured I had nothing to lose by ordering the DVDs. So even though I didn't have immediate relief from my physical symptoms, my outlook just changed just like that. The second thing that I noticed was the chemical sensitivities. As I started to feel better, I started to go into public more and more, and I was in a store, and I don't remember if it was a candle or potpourri or what, but it smelled wonderful. So for something like that to smell good to me was big. And the more I went out in public and noticed smells didn't bother me, the more confident I got about going out into public. So I started socializing again. I started going to the theater again. I started going to the movies again. All the things I loved, I started doing again. Eventually, I was able to work on the foods as well. That was my biggest challenge. It took a little bit longer. I started noticing that the smell of food didn't bother me. When I would observe other people eating foods, this food smelled good. It smelled appetizing, and I wanted to try it. And so I started with my food sensitivities first, and I noticed that I wasn't being bothered. I didn't have gut issues. I didn't have inflammation. I actually felt good after eating. That was huge for me. It encouraged me to go out and start eating at restaurants and not check ingredients all the time. And by not checking ingredients, I actually had an accidental exposure to a food I used to be anaphylactic to. And I didn't have a reaction. Nothing happened. And I didn't find out that what the ingredient was until after I'd already eaten it, and I was fine. So I went to my allergist, and he skin tested me, and nothing turned up positive. Everything was negative. So all of my allergies had been wiped clean. It was not just the sensitivities, it was the actual allergies were gone. So to overcome not only a food sensitivity, but an actual food allergy, which I had been told by a doctor that I would never be cured of, was just mind-blowing. To top it off, within the next year, I went into a doctor's office for a routine physical, had some routine blood work drawn up. The Sjorgrens autoimmune disorder that I had been diagnosed with back in 2009, the markers no longer showed up. So it was this if I never had the disease. Not everyone needs to attend an in-person seminar in order to recover. I'm proof of that. I just did the DVDs and here I am, recovered. I strongly encourage coaching, but I just want to let you know that you can get better with just the DVDs.